All right, let's try that. All right. That ought to do us. All right. I guess I should turn on the screens, shouldn't I? Showing pictures, I guess.
Unless you like the guy, like those infomercials where the guy's like drawing the
Yeah.
stuff as somebody's speaking.
Yeah. Yeah, no problem.
If you could do that, that would be fun on the screen. I'd love to see that.
All right.
So did you and Judy get the vaccine?
Judy did not.
Oh.
Judy's waiting. And so Judy is able to continue to just basically socially isolate herself from everybody. And she has a history of having bad reactions to vaccines. And so, we were a little nervous about her getting it. So,
No, I understand. I've got a couple friends that had pretty significant reactions to vaccines in the past.
so I got mine, and I'll get my second jab April 7th. So,
Back at Costco.
yep, a month. So they're 4 weeks.
Oh, yeah, right. Moderna. Yeah, Moderna's 4 weeks, Pfizer's 3.
Yeah, if I could go back and do it again, I think I would have sought out the Pfizer one, tried to find the Pfizer one, because from what I hear, it's the kinder, gentler one, and
The second dose of Pfizer has knocked people. Like I said, the first dose of Moderna seems to be maybe the more significant, and the second dose of Pfizer.
oh, okay, good. I'm hoping that that's true. That the second dose of Moderna is like.
Well, yeah. At least with the Pfizer, because that's the vaccine that we've given the most, and I've heard the most feedback from.
Okay.
Even I myself, for like 18 hours, I felt like I didn't feel horrible, but I felt crummy, like I was coming down with a cold.
Right. That's kind of the way that I felt. I felt almost like I felt like a flu is what I felt like. Like I was just body aches and tired and.
Yeah, I had the fatigue and the
Yeah.
headache and the fuzziness, but I didn't have the all over body aches. But
Yeah.
my boss did.
Yeah, and when I was on statins for my heart, back after I had my heart attack, that's the way I felt all day, every day, basically. It was like I had a low-grade flu. It just hurt. I had muscle aches and joints and stuff. And he'd be like, well, it's better than being dead. And I'd be like, you're right about that. I'll stick with it. But he said basically like after a year, I'd get to go off of it if I was, my cholesterol numbers, because like my cholesterol wasn't bad. So after a year, I got to go off of it. But when I was on it, if I got a flu and it was like stuff on top of that, oh my gosh, it was horrible. It was no good. All right, so I'm going to show you, it was like day 4 that we were in Israel, and this is the far north. You can see how green and pretty it is. It's totally different than any place else in southern Israel. Even the Sea of Galilee, which is really pretty and is it's the breadbasket of the Middle East, basically. They grow, that's their number one export in Israel is their food, their crops. But it's not what you would call lush and green and pretty. But when you get up about another 45 minutes north of the Sea of Galilee, right at the far northern reach of Israel, that's where you get to. This is it's Dan. Was the ancient tribe of Dan, and it's the headwaters of the Jordan River. And there's like 4 different springs. It's at the foot of Mount Hermon, which is the only place in Israel you can go usually that has snow in the winter. Although this year it snowed in Jerusalem, and I saw a video of it, and I mean not like in Southern California it used to snow sometimes, and the snow would fall, and maybe even sometimes it kind of turned the grass a little white. This was like 6 inches of snow on the cobblestones of Jerusalem. I was like, I can't even imagine trying to walk there when it's like that. But up at Mount Hermon, there's always snow, and so this is where the Jordan River comes from. If anybody has any questions, either here or online, go ahead and ask, and we'll see.
So I just remember you talking about how horrible the traffic and stuff was.
In Jerusalem? Oh my gosh, yeah, with snow?
I mean, you can't figure it out here or Seattle and stuff. I mean, can't imagine they were there.
Yeah, I can't imagine that either. I hadn't even thought about that. Because in the old city, and that's where I saw the video from the old city, it's like there's not much, it's not a lot of cars driving through the old city. It's mostly just for deliveries and stuff like that cars are allowed in there. But yeah, the outskirts, and it's like it's all on hills and stuff. Yeah, that would be a nightmare. Okay, so yeah, short video of one of the rivers that runs, that feeds the Jordan River. There I am. Ha ha, look at me. I'm by the Jordan River. Huh? It really is. It's, and it's like, yeah. Now, this year that we went, last year in 2020, it was the wettest winter on record for them. And like the Sea of Galilee was like 15 feet higher than it had been the year before. And there was grass growing at Qumran at the Dead Sea. And like our guide was like, I didn't even know there was any grass here that could grow, but it was like you'd look at the mountains around the Dead Sea that are normally just this red clay, and they'd have this tinge of green to them. And everybody's like, this is really weird. So yeah, so very, very green and wet. That's our group. We're standing there. I'm guessing David is teaching us. That's a bigger, let's see, where am I? There I am. That's a bigger tributary of the Jordan. It's like up above, north of us, north of where this is. A couple of different springs had fed in, and now this is getting bigger. And as it goes down, a couple more will fill in. And in a few minutes, I'm going to show you where it goes to this waterfall. And I mean, it was just crazy. So yeah, this is the farthest northern part of Israel. Okay. It says no swimming over here. It has a little picture of a guy in a wheelchair too. It's like, even if you're in a wheelchair, you're not allowed to go in there. I was like, hey, I asked our guide, I was like, what's the deal with that? He goes, oh, they're just trying to make sure they cover all their bases just like we do here. Okay, so that'll show you, it's like the water was just coming up out of the ground in some places. And I guess it was from Mount Hermon, and it's like, and it's just all part of it that flows into this river and creates this massive river that up here is really pretty. And down in the southern part of Israel is not nearly as pretty. And I had this song the whole time that I was there, because when I was a kid at youth group, we sang this song about the Jordan River, and it was like, Jordan River, I'm bound to cross, and then you would say that like 4 times, and then at the end say, I've got one more river to cross. And so I apologize, all of my videos, I'm kind of just taking the video as I walk, but yeah, I heard myself humming there. So yeah, that's what I'm humming. In Dan, this is the source of the Dan River, is basically what that's saying. So yeah, he would stop and teach us, and we'd sit down. I think he was talking about the Jordan River and all these different things. I think he brought up the whole as the deer pants for the water, and he was talking about how David spent a lot of time up in this part of the country, and I mean it's probably the prettiest part of all of Israel.
It's gorgeous, huh?
Yeah, did you hear that guy? It's just coming up out of the ground. Huh. I had never seen anything like that. So then there's a little thing that says, on this way to ancient Dan. These rocks, you can see they're kind of walls, 3,000 years old. And these ones you could actually go over and walk around and touch and stuff. A lot of that stuff that was that old, it was like, oh no, you're not going over there. But this we were allowed to go over and kind of look at. But it's like, I thought this was really impressive. And then we got to a place where it was even more impressive. This is the most well-preserved high place in all of Israel. And if you know anything about the Old Testament, Judges, you read about them, the book of Judges, Joshua, and throughout the history of Israel, like that some kings would come along and they would tear down the high places. The high places were the sites of pagan idol worship. And so the people of the Middle East, of that part of the world, believed that the gods, the higher you went, the closer you got to the gods. And so they would put their shrines at the top of a mountain, and they would worship up there. So when Israel comes along, this practice is already, thousands of years old, and they're already worshiping Baal and Moloch and all these other pagan gods. And so when under Joshua they come in, they tear down all of the ancient high places, and they separate up all the land between the different tribes, and then each tribe is responsible for making sure that those high places stay destroyed. And while Joshua is alive, for the most part, that kind of is what happens. But when Joshua dies and Judges begins, there's this cycle where they'll build up the high places again. They'll start worshiping Baal. God will pull back his support. They'll get conquered. They'll cry out to God. God will send a judge, a hero, who then will drive out the oppressors. While that person is alive, usually Israel doesn't go to the high places to worship. But then when he dies or she dies in Judges, they'll do it again. So this right here is the ancient, obviously it's metal, right? It's not the actual altar that they worshiped at, that they burnt their offerings on. They just built this sort of metal framework around it to give you an idea of the size of it. But that was where they did their sacrificing, up these steps, and on the other side of that tree is where the temple was that they would worship at. And so this had always been a high place. When Israel splits between the north and the south, Jeroboam can't have his people going down to Jerusalem to worship, so he sets up 2 temples of his own. And this is one of them. This is in the farthest north part of their country. So just to give you an idea, that tree there that I was showing you, it wasn't there, obviously 3,000 years ago, but it grew up in the ruins, and so they left it there. And you can see this is the more ancient part of it, but these are like the original blocks from the temple that Jeroboam built. And you can see, and as I show you more pictures, these are scorch marks from times when the Assyrians or the Babylonians or the Egyptians or the Greeks or the Romans or whoever it happened to be would come through and just destroy everything and light everything on fire. And you can see the scorch marks all over the place. There's the altar. This is from above. This is the altar. This is that big tree, and then this is the temple complex that those people were sitting on the top step kind of looking down this direction from the pictures that I was showing you. We never got to go up there because we were in a hurry that day, and I was bummed at the time, but I'm glad. What? Yeah, our guy was, Shannon's been coming for a while. The guy that is like sort of the face behind the tour is Michael Card. And he was here telling us how, he started these tours because he was at Capernaum, and there was a tour where a guy said to his tour guide, I want to go look at Peter's house. And the guy was like, we don't have time to look at Peter's house. We need to go. Let's go. And so this guy was saying, Michael Card was saying, I want to have a tour where nobody's ever in a hurry. And you get to see whatever you want to see. Well, he even told us that the night that we got there, right? That was his point. That was his vision for this trip. And the next day, man, our guide was like get going. We have to get going. But yeah, so we didn't get to go up there. But you can see it's like this is like where the golden calf would have been, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. These are rooms for the priests and stuff, and then back here is the Holy of Holies and the holy place. It's like it was fashioned after the Jerusalem temple. It's just it was slightly different in that there was an idol in it. So just to give you an idea of the size of the altar that was there. The reason they didn't rebuild like a replica of it is because the conservative Jews would have come unhinged. You were reinstituting the worship of Baal in Israel, and it would have been a huge deal. And it's really interesting, even the secular Israelis who claim not to believe in God are like, yeah, we don't want to be rebuilding those things. Remember what happened when we didn't listen to God? And so it's kind of fascinating. You talk to these Israelis who are atheists, right? And when you start talking to them about all these wars that they've been through, three at least, where they were so badly outnumbered that there is no way that they should have survived. And not only did they win, they won huge and took back huge chunks of land every time they were attacked. And you start going, how is that possible? How is that, you know what I mean? And just about all of them, I was reading an article, will say, yeah, it's almost miraculous, huh? It's like, yeah, it's almost miraculous that you guys exist in the first place and that you weren't wiped off the map at least 3 times. So yeah, you can really see the scorch marks on all of these blocks. Okay, so talking about the altar. This is in Exodus 27. God says, using acacia wood, construct a square altar, 7.5 feet wide, 7.5 feet long, 4.5 feet high. Make horns for each of its 4 corners so that the horns and altar are all one piece. Overlay the altar with bronze. So the horns of the altar are these pieces right here. I don't know why they call them horns, and it wasn't exclusive to Israel. The altars in the temples of Baal had those things. But this is what we just read there in Exodus, that's the pattern for the altar at which you would burn sacrifices to Yahweh that was that they would carry around with them and put in front of the tabernacle when they were wandering, and that eventually was put in front of the temple in Jerusalem. But they used the same pattern for the 2 temples in the northern part of the country, and these are those horns. Nobody knows for sure why God wanted those to be there, but they had a very interesting function, I guess you would say. Oh, okay. So this is a picture of what it would have looked like when it was all kind of set up. And the horns right there, and you burn, kind of like a barbecue, except you burned everything just completely to a crisp and ashes. There's a small example of it, the horns there. So here's the function of the horns. Then all of Adonijah's guests jumped up. So this is when they find out Solomon is the new king, right? David is on his deathbed. There's been all this competition. Which of his sons is going to be the king? And they have anointed Solomon finally. And Adonijah was another, he was vying for the crown, right? And so he's just sure Solomon's going to kill him. All of Adonijah's guests jumped up in a panic from the banquet table and quickly scattered. Adonijah was afraid of Solomon, so he rushed to the sacred tent and grabbed onto the horns of the altar. So he grabbed hold of those, right? Word soon reached Solomon that Adonijah had seized the horns of the altar in fear and that he was pleading, let King Solomon swear today that he will not kill me. Well, that's awfully crooked, isn't it? I'm going to have to fix that before Sunday. But the custom in that part of the world, and it was true before Israel got there, is that if you were being chased by someone, even the king, and they wanted to kill you, if you could get to a temple and you could grab hold, touch, it's like tag, right? It's like it's like if you could get there and touch it, they couldn't touch you. Now, if you let go, they could kill you right there in the temple, right? And there are all these stories about it. But if you held on to that thing and you just never let go, they weren't allowed to kill you. And you can read it in, I don't know if it's in Numbers or Leviticus, the cities of refuge in Israel that were set up as places where if you accidentally killed someone in Israel in the ancient world, their kinsman redeemer was like by oath required to kill you, right? Which then your kinsman redeemer would have to it would create this huge feud, right? Blood feud. And so they set up all of these cities of refuge where if you could get to one of the cities of refuge and you could get to the horns of the altar, they couldn't touch you. And as a matter of fact, they couldn't even kill you in the city of refuge. And so that's just sort of was always the custom in that part of the world. Now, King Solomon, see, it shows them trying to drag him away from the guy. They're trying to act it out. But King Solomon, at one point, like with Adonijah, King Solomon's like, all right, yeah, tell him I'm not going to kill him. Don't worry about it. Now, there's another guy later that runs and grabs hold of the horns of the altar there outside of it was the tabernacle at the time. He hadn't built the temple yet. And his general came and told him that guy was doing it. He goes, go kill him anyway. So he did, I guess it's like, I don't know, I guess it's good to be the king. But most of the time, it works. So this is talking about when Solomon's the last king of the United Kingdom, right? The whole kingdom together. When he dies, his son and his general fight, and his son ends up controlling the southern kingdom of Judah, and Jeroboam or Rehoboam, I think it's Jeroboam, is the general. He owns the northern kingdom. So on the advice of his counselors, the king made up 2 gold calves. He said to the people, it is too much trouble for you to worship in Jerusalem. Look, Israel, these are the gods who brought you out of Egypt. He placed these calf idols in Bethel, which is at the far south, the farthest southern part of his kingdom, right before you get to Judah, and Dan, which is at the far northest part of his kingdom, at either end of his kingdom. But this became a great sin, for the people worshipped the idols, traveling as far north as Dan to worship the one there. So that's probably what the golden calf looked like in Israel. It probably wasn't that sophisticated, the one that they made in Egypt or by Mount Sinai that Aaron made, and Moses freaked out. But it's interesting because they made these 2 golden calves, right? They put one in Dan, the temple in Dan at the farthest north, and one at the temple in Bethel, farthest south. And like if you understand Jewish tradition about the throne of God, God's throne has seraphim on either side. There are these many-winged creatures with all these eyes and the head of a lion and the body of an eagle. It's like they're like the most terrifying creatures that these people could imagine. And the imagery of Yahweh on his throne is he's got these seraphim on either side, right? And so on the Ark of the Covenant, there's these, I think they're cherubim. They're just angels, but they're sort of sitting there, their wings reaching out towards each other, and then it's right in between the wings of the cherubim, according to Exodus, that's where, like, the mercy seat of God. That's where he sort of dwells on earth, type of thing. The idea that the northern kingdom taught that Yahweh sat on a throne with golden calves on either side. And so the idea that there's a calf in the farthest northern part of Dan and the farthest southern part of their kingdom in Bethel is saying God dwells here, right, in Israel, not down in Judah. He dwells here in our country. And so that's kind of the imagery for all of that. If we could see, I don't know if I've got a picture looking over the other side, you'd look down into the valley and it's like you'd be looking down into Lebanon basically now, and all the way out, and there's kind of a mountain range out there, and then on the other side of that would be the Mediterranean. But okay, so here's just to give you an idea. There's Dan way up there, and then here is Bethel way down here, and Jerusalem is here. So this is.
So aren't the Golan Heights right there?
Yeah, so the Golan is,
Yeah,
right in this area.
before Damascus and
Yeah, so,
close to the north of the Sea of Galilee, but close to it.
yeah, very close.
Yeah.
And so this is a map of ancient Israel. They didn't control this area. They now control this area, right? They didn't, like when Israel became a nation again in 1940, whatever it was, 8 or 9, when the United Nations made them a nation. This is basically, it's not exactly the borders that they gave them, but it's pretty close, right? And there's like the what do they call that area inside? That's not supposed to be Israel. The West Bank. The West Bank is all sort of in here in the middle, and is, theoretically Arab or Palestinian or whatever you want to call it. And so that's the way it started. Then in 1949, after they become a nation, they're attacked by all of the Arabs living all around, and they win, and they take back some of the land that they weren't really supposed to be in control of. But what they said is, like, they were like, okay, well, let's make a peace treaty then. The Arabs wouldn't make a peace treaty with them. So they were like, well, we're not going to leave this. This is occupied land now then, because we can't, you're going to attack us again. By not signing a treaty, you've basically told us you're going to attack us again. We're going to keep control of this area until we sign a peace treaty. So then in 1964, is that when the next one is? When either the 3-Day War or the Yom Kippur War, I can never remember which one is which, but basically in both of those, they're attacked again. They take back these massive amounts of land again, say, let's enter into a peace treaty, and the Arabs say no. And they're like, okay, well, we're holding on to this land now. And so that's what's going on now, and they control basically like let's see, where's the Jordan? There's the Jordan. Because they did enter into a peace treaty, Jordan did enter into a peace treaty with them. So now all of this is back to Jordan, right? Yeah, they had taken back all of this. As a matter of fact, they could have kept going. Israel could have in those 2 wars. They didn't. They stopped kind of out here. And then when they entered into the peace treaty with Jordan, then they came back, and now This is all Jordan on this side of the Jordan River. This is all Israel on this side of the Jordan River. But yeah, it's like, I'm not sure exactly where, but Israel controls all of this side over here and way out over here. So Dan, you'll see in this Old Testament one, is way down here, but when the city of Dan is way up there. Dan didn't like living here because it's right by the Philistines, and the Philistines were powerful back then, and so they were constantly getting beat up on. So somebody came and was like, it's really pretty up there. And so they were like, okay, everybody pack up. And they went up north, and they went over here, and they wiped out this town that was right there, and they established the tribe of Dan in the far north. So kind of interesting. Yeah, it's like, I want to live up there. And there are, like, throughout the prophets are just railing against the tribe of Dan for giving up their inheritance down by, it's basically the coast where Tel Aviv is now, that area, Jaffa. So yeah, here's where the golden calf would have been. There's that altar. They kind of colored it in with the horns and everything. And then back here, the ruins of the holy place rooms, all of that. Okay, so then in Amos, God says, now listen to this and announce it throughout all of Israel, says the Lord, the God of heaven's armies. On the very day I punish Israel for its sins, I will destroy the pagan altars. He's talking about Bethel and Dan. And he says, the horns of the altar will be cut off and fall to the ground. And so he's talking about these things. And people have, like, I don't know about you, I read that, I'm like, what does that mean? What is he even talking about? What scholars think he means is there will be no place for you to run. Right? There's not going to be a place of safety. Yeah, it's like those things will be gone. You'll run for them, but they'll be gone. And you think, boy, that's cold of God. Why does he do that? But it's like all of these are warnings. All of the prophets, especially the minor prophets, are telling them, you need to change your ways or else I'm going to pull back and bad things are going to happen. And that's exactly what happens. So yeah, it shows Jeroboam. Okay, yeah, there he is. Jeroboam, it was Solomon's general. And when the Civil War happens, that's what he ends up in the north. So, okay, so I did get a picture kind of looking down into, and I'm not sure, it's like Syria and Lebanon are kind of close by up there, and it's like I was never sure unless there was a plaque that was telling me you're looking down into Syria right now. And I think this is looking west towards Lebanon, and then we were walking up to where we could look. Yeah, okay. So we're kind of continuing on. Now that's Syria. So this is literally the farthest northern part of Israel. And that road down there is the border, basically. And so out here is Syria. And right on the other side of that hill, there's a town. Used to be a town, but it's not anymore. There were cows over there, and there were birds sitting on top of the cows. I just thought that was weird. So this is talking about the water war. I'll just read it to you because I wrote it all down on here we go. Okay. A pencil was responsible for the water war between Syria and Israel. The British wanted the border between the British Mandate area of Eretz, Israel, and the French Mandate area of Syria and Lebanon to reflect the biblical verse that Israel stretched from Dan to Beersheba. So the line north of Dan was drawn in 1923 with a number 2 pencil. Or I don't know if they had number 2 pencils back then, but just to give you an idea, there's where the line was drawn, right? But on the map that they drew it on, the width of the pencil line represented something like 30 meters of land, right? And you're like, what's the big deal between 30 meters or not 30 meters. And the big deal is that kind of at the end of this road is the spring that the Dan River comes from. And so Syria let's see, what year was that? In 1964, Syria looked at that and said, the pencil line, the actual line, belongs to us. And Israel is on the other side of that line, but they meant for this to belong to us. And they were a much more powerful nation at that point than Israel was. And so they come with tanks and artillery, and I guess this whole valley here was just filled with soldiers and all this stuff, and construction vehicles, because at the very end of this, where the Dan River is, they were starting to try to divert the river so that it no longer flowed into Israel, so that it would flow only kind of to the west and into Lebanon. And when Israel figured out what was going on, then they come, I mean, just with everything they've got, because that would have really done a lot of damage. And so there's this big battle that takes place, and Israel destroys all of Syria's tanks and artillery and everything. And it's like in the little town that was out there that they built for the, kind of as the basis, they were like, well, we need the water for our town. It's like, so there's no town there. It's like there's buildings there now, but there's nobody living there because there was no reason to have a town there. They just they were just messing with Israel. So yeah. So these are the trenches. It's like you can see that lady is standing up on this wall, and where she's looking is in that direction. So she's standing on that wall looking off into Syria. This is the trenches that the Israeli soldiers fought from. And there's a HBO series right now called The Valley of Tears that's about the Yom Kippur War. And it's kind of interesting, but it's like at one point they were here, and it's like, I'm like, oh my gosh, I was there. And it's like, but they were, acting like it was, back in 1964 or whatever, and they were fighting. But yeah, it was wild. And so yeah, in front, this way is Syria, that way is Lebanon. So we walked on around and left the Syria border, and this is called the Abraham Gate. I don't know how clear it is on your screen, if you can tell that's like a gate. They filled it in. Actually, it was already filled in. They didn't undo it because then the frame around the gate would have fallen. But this is, they call it the Abraham Gate because it's at least 3,000 years old. And Abraham, we know, was in this part of the world several times. And so almost assuredly, Abraham walked on those rocks right there and through that gate into that city. And the city would have had walls that were going up, like there's a model right here that I'll show you in a second. But yeah, the walls would have used to come way up here. But yeah, that just better picture of it. Me standing next to the Abraham Gate. Okay, so where I was standing, is about right there. The gate, you can't really tell because of the color. It's like down here, and then here's the walls that came up from there. The reason that it's still as nice as it is that the people who lived in this town, so this is before Dan has come up there, this is before Israel as a nation, this town must have rebelled against whatever power was trying to keep them their sovereign, right? And there are several the archaeologists can tell it was burned a dozen times within about 100-year period of time. And the final time they were like, all right, you know what? We're done dealing with this town. They just filled it in. Can you imagine an excavation process like that where you fill in that big of a city? It doesn't look that big sitting here and looking at it, but it's like to just completely fill it in and cover it with dirt It's like, how do they do that? That just seems impossible to me. But that's what they did. And because they did that, it just was totally preserved. And so as the archaeologists are coming down, they start finding this stuff. They're like, whoa. It's like that is the most well-preserved 3,000-year-old gate you are going to see. I think sometime in the like 80s and 90s, a lot of the stuff that they discovered that you see now, especially in this part of Israel, they couldn't excavate back years ago because it was controlled by, either Syria or Lebanon, right? Or Jordan. And so now that Israel has control there, then they're, well, not just there, but any archaeologist can come in and excavate the site. And so, yeah, it's like if they had found it like 100 years ago, it'd be gone now. And that's why they've built this great big glass thing over the top of it to keep it from getting rained on. And it's like, yeah, back behind in that area. But it's like they've done an awful lot of it. But yeah, they're still working. There's some, but not so much in the archaeological areas. It's like they seem to, everybody seems to just be like, okay. Now, maybe you just don't see it, right? Because it's like that's, they are, like I had heard that London was the most surveilled city in the world, that you can't take a step anywhere in London without being filmed. But some people wonder if Israel might not be the most surveilled country in the world, and that so they may be watching even when you don't know they're watching. I don't know, but yeah. And so you can see there's the big city that was destroyed long before Israel becomes a nation, and then over here there's this thing here, and that's where I'm going next, and that's the actual place. That's the actual city of Dan. So yeah, it's like the Abraham gate was kind of back behind us in that way, and then this is the walls of the city of Dan. And this is another high place. It's not the one that Jeroboam built, but this is another place where, right here, where they would worship and sacrifice to their gods. That just floored me. 3,000, no, so yeah, so this would be 25, 22, no, Abraham. Yeah, somewhere around 2,800, 3,000 years old. It's just, it's crazy. So yeah, this is what it used to look like. And now it's just, a lot of it's been kind of knocked off the top. There's the altar. So the Israel Museum in Jerusalem, yeah, it's like you walk through the Israel Museum and like the Dead Sea Scrolls are there. I was showing from a couple of weeks ago in Chorazim, which is on the northern edge of the Sea of Galilee. They found the most, the best instance of a Moses seat, which were in all of the synagogues. And so, when almost nothing is left from then, because Rome comes down 30 years after Jesus' death and wipes out Israel, right? And just destroys everything. And they do a really good job. So there's nothing much left from then, but there was a really good example of the Moses seat in Chorazim. So you can see it, a replica of it in Chorazim. They have it sitting where, they call it in situ, right? In its situation, or where it was found, and at the door of the synagogue, because it's where the guy that was going to make a ruling would sit, and it was like then he had like the authority of Moses, they had that in Chorazim, but the real one is in Israel, is in Jerusalem at the Israel Museum, you know? And so they've got a lot of that kind of thing. This is the walls of Tel Dan. That's our guide, David, and that's my son, Jonathan. And he's sitting down. David called him up to be the example in this particular case. You can tell he's a little surly. He doesn't like being an example. He's like, you know, he was a good sport, but, you know, he wasn't like, oh, I get to be the example. And so he's telling us about this spot that's outside the city gates. It's where this is a bench right here behind him. It goes on this direction for a ways. And then right here is sort of almost like a throne where the most important person in the town would sit and would be the judge, and then the other wise men of the town would sit on these benches out here. And so Jonathan's waiting to see if he's going to make a joke about him. He didn't. He was, you know, just wanting somebody to sit there for him to go, yeah, this is the king. And as soon as, so we could have gone inside the city, right? Inside the walls of the city, but we were in a hurry. So he's like, okay, so, you know, that's the city of Dan. Let's go. We got to get on the bus, and we're going to another place next. And so I stopped the guy, and I was like, what's it like inside there? He goes, oh, it's awesome. And I was like, at that point, I was still grumpy about the fact. I'm like, it's right here. I could go in. Give me 15 minutes. But I was actually glad later on in the tour when I realized it was like, okay, we wouldn't have seen, you know, the Mount of Transfiguration if we had spent too much time there. We wouldn't have been able to go to, you know, all these other different places. And so his thinking was, this is Old Testament history. We're on the Life of Christ tour. And I get it. That makes sense to me. Someday I'll go back and do the Old Testament tour. So this is just the countryside between that area that we were at, Tel Dan, and where we were going next, which is to Caesarea Philippi. And they've got all of these bunkers all over the place. It's like if you went into that bunker, you would go down underneath, and it would basically take you to different places that on the other side of this mountain, they'd be able to, you know, artillery placements and stuff like that for protection and everything. So yeah, you can see that you can't tell because there's but there's this big canyon running down here, and that's where we're going next. The stairs leading down. I felt really bad for some of the less ambulatory people in our group because there were some people that would have a hard time walking up these stairs, you know? And I was like, are you serious? You're going to go down there? And they did. And we made it. Huh?
There's kind of a handrail.
Yeah, there were. But still. But what we're going down to is the river. I'm not sure which river that one would be. But that used to flow out of the gates of hell from Caesarea Philippi. And so I'll show you a picture of that in here in just a minute. But this is in January. It's like there were still flowers even in January, which I was very pleased with. I don't know if you can tell there's water down there below them. This is what's called the Suspended Trail. And it's like this canyon. Kind of reminded me of, if you've ever been down south, kind of gotten down into 6 Mile Canyon down there. And it's like just this, almost like a gorge. And then at the bottom, there's just water from wall to wall just running through there. It's not as impressive as 6 Mile Canyon, but it's like they built this suspended trail on the side of the wall, and you're just kind of walking over the top of the river. It was really cool. And I think this is where he was teaching us about Caesarea Philippi, but we'll see. That was growing out of the bottom of the rock. It's like, that's like I'm taking a picture straight on. It's like these things are coming down from inside the rock. I thought that was cool. They were working on the the thing, and people were like going, "Is it safe?" They're like hanging there underneath, doing work on, I don't know exactly what, but it's like there was nothing underneath them. One of these is going to be a video of the water flowing through. I just didn't, I didn't imagine this would be part of a tour to Israel. You know what I mean? It's like you could, I mean, I guess if you were really, really good, you could kayak that, right? But they called it they called it class 6 whitewater because of how there were just rocks everywhere. There was no way to get through it, you know? Tree right in the middle of the river. The water just flowed right around it. Reminded me of that song. As a matter of fact, I think I might have it. Yeah, happy are those who don't listen to the wicked, who don't go where sinners go, don't do what evil people do, but they love the Lord's teachings. They think about those teachings day and night. They are strong like a tree planted by a river. The tree produces fruit in season. Its leaves don't die, and everything they do will succeed. That idea of a tree planted by a river, that's what I was thinking of when I saw this thing. And it's like, that thing's never gonna want for moisture, you know? Does that say plane tree? I think that's what that says. When I was talking last weekend about Jacob peeling the bark off of the branches, this is one of the trees, the plane tree. Okay, so Caesarea Philippi. We'll do this real quick. Yeah, we'll do it real quick. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked the disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" Well, they replied, "Some say John the Baptist, some say Elijah, others say Jeremiah or one of the prophets." And then he asked them, "But who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Jesus replied, "You are blessed, Simon, son of John, because my Father in heaven has revealed this to you. You did not learn this from any human being. Now I say to you that you are Peter, which means rock. And upon this rock I will build my church, and all the powers of hell will not conquer it." So that's a modern translation. What he literally says is, the gates of Hades will not overcome it. And I don't know what imagery you get in your mind when you picture him saying that. I always had this imagery of the gates of Hades will not overcome my church, right? That's what he's saying. It's like I always thought that meant that Hades was attacking the church. But our guide pointed out gates don't attack anything. Gates protect, right? Gates defend. And so this is not talking about Hades attacking the church. This is talking about the church attacking Hades, and that the gates of Hades won't be able to stand against Jesus' church. So in this place, Caesarea Philippi, it was built by Herod the Great's son, Philip. And it's like all of Herod's children had like this envy of their father's building programs, right? And so they all tried to do their own. And so Philip had Caesarea Philippi made, and it was the center of the worship of the god Pan. And that's the gates of hell right there. That water that I was showing you a minute ago that was just flowing through, just crazy. As a matter of fact, I think I've got this is the waterfall. That used to come out of that. It doesn't anymore, but it did. And give you an idea, let's see. Okay, so the gate, the hole is actually over here to this side. This is something that they've carved in. There used to be statues of the gods in there and stuff. There's a great big one of Pan here. And they believed that, like they couldn't, there was no telling how deep that hole that the water came out of was, and so they believed it was the entrance to the underworld. And so they called it the gates of Hades. And what they thought was that the gods would go down into Hades during the winter, which is why everything died and everything got all brown and nasty. And then at springtime, they would come back up and out. And so they would, in their rituals and their worship of Pan, they would do really gross things to try to draw the gods out and make spring a little earlier, like sexual stuff between humans and goats and stuff like that. And so this is like 25 miles away from the Sea of Galilee, but it was a world of difference as far as Galilee is all Jewish, worship of Yahweh, and this is the center of pagan worship in that part of the world at that time. And so when Jesus comes to Caesarea Philippi, most experts think this is where he brings them to the temple of Pan, that he brings them to the gates of hell, which is why he mentions it. This is an artist's rendering of what it might have looked like. When I was showing you that picture, that thing right there is behind this. Or no, it's right there. And then there's the things that are the niches where they had, and then this was a temple to Zeus, this was a temple to Caesar Agrippa, and behind that's the gates of hell. And so when Jesus and his disciples come, they think that they're standing like down in here somewhere, and he says, the gates of hell will not prevail against my church. And some people think, he makes that interesting comment about, I tell you, you are Peter, which means rock. And then he says, and upon this rock I will build my church. And people argue about what the rock is upon which he will build his church. The Catholic Church would say he was talking about Peter himself, and that's why they think that Peter is the first pope. Protestants mostly would say he was talking about the confession that Peter made, that you are the Christ, upon that rock I will build my church. But a lot of scholars think he's talking about, I'm going to build my church right on top of this rock, the rocks of Pan, and the gates of Hades, they won't be able to stop my church. And so I thought that was quite interesting. When I was in college at Pepperdine, every summer, one of the religion professors would go to Israel and was part of a archaeological project on the Banias project is what it's called. Well, it's called Banias because somebody at one point in time misread how to say it. It's actually Panias, after Pan. But that's Caesarea Philippi. And I think that's a good place to stop. So let's have a prayer. Father, we're grateful for your Son and for the life that he gives us, and we just ask that you would open our minds and help us to understand what all of this means for us, not just for knowledge, but for understanding how you want us to live our lives. Help us to wrap our brains around what it means that the church is to be attacking the gates of hell and not defending against them. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right. Oh, I love that stuff. I'm already trying to plan my next trip, but I don't know that it'll actually happen.
Is this your first trip?
Yeah, that's the first time I ever went. Yeah.
How many people were in your group?
Like 30.
How many days long has it been?
10. Yeah, and it hadn't even occurred to me. That's another thing that Michael Card would say when he was here. He's like, we try to have a smaller group, and I was like, 30 people is a small group? Well, it turns out most of those tours have like 10 of those massive buses